Nintendo's unprecedented moves against emulation has shaken the emulation community as a whole. Nintendo is suing Yuzu, or more accurately, the conglomerate behind Yuzu, Tropic Haze LLC. For those not in the know, Tropic Haze also developed Citra, a 3DS emulator. For those who know Nintendo like I know Nintendo, Nintendo dislikes emulation. And until now, Nintendo has been combating emulation in more indirect ways. They DMCA'd Lockpick RCM, a little tool designed to help you dump your own product keys. They've also gone after YouTube channels such as The Fox. For those not in the know, The Fox was one of the first channels to have a true Nintendo Switch emulation guide on Steam Deck. Of course, that video got taken down, but a couple of other Nintendo emulation related videos such as some GPD Win 2 videos were taken down. And of course, ROM websites were taken down. That one is ultimately a little more justifiable, but it doesn't suck any less. The emulation community has made an enemy out of Nintendo simply for existing. Now one has to wonder, why is Nintendo all of a sudden suing Yuzu? Of all the times they could have sued many other emulators, why sue Yuzu now? In terms of console features and Nintendo Network features, Nintendo may be behind, but their legal team is always on top of things. Many will point to Sony vs. Bleem being an example of emulation being protected. But the truth is that Nintendo wants to change all of that. Sony vs. Bleem happened over 20 years ago at this point. The thing most people don't understand about laws is that the laws are not set in stone. Many laws are defined in court. And as society changes, so too must our laws, and different laws have different interpretations depending on which judge is presiding over them. Video game emulation may be protected today by Sony vs. Bleem, but tomorrow it could be outlawed thanks to Nintendo vs. Tropic Haze LLC. Regardless of whether or not you or I think that Nintendo has a case or not, the fact is that Nintendo is suing and it's going to change emulation no matter what the verdict is. So first, let's talk about the worst case scenario. What if Nintendo does in fact win the court case? There's a lot of legal muscle behind Nintendo's legal team, so it's not entirely unreasonable to think that Nintendo could win. Nintendo could cease and desist Yuzu. Yuzu as it exists today or tomorrow would not be available for download anymore. But that's like the least of our concerns, right? I mean, Yuzu is open source, so literally anyone, including I, could fork Yuzu and then have it maintained there on a new fork, and then it would just exist. It would continue to exist in its current state. The big issue though is that Yuzu likely wouldn't see any major developments. Sure, the Nintendo Switch may be at the end of its life cycle, but think about it. Many emulators like Dolphin still get developments, even though, you know, the GameCube and Wii haven't been the latest consoles in almost 20 years. And of course, let's not forget the Yuzu team has a Patreon page. Yuzu on Patreon makes enough money for it to be a full-time job for some people. Making an emulator that actually works and that can actually play games from start to finish is an insane task. And while you could do it as a hobby, wouldn't it feel better and wouldn't it be more beneficial if you could just do it full-time and still get paid doing it? So yeah, there wouldn't be any money funding Yuzu development. The legal document against Yuzu also explicitly mentions the Yuzu Patreon, which according to Nintendo apparently has over 7,000 Patreons, and according to the Patreon page, the entire Yuzu team earns $30,000 a month. And on top of that, there's a paid version on the Google Play Store, earning an additional $50,000. It is kind of sacrilege to talk about payments and being paid and like how much money you make and all of that stuff. But I will say, money is a great motivator for continuing development. If developing Yuzu was my full-time job, so to speak, and all of a sudden Nintendo prevents me from being paid, like, why bother? And in this economy, you can't afford to not pay your bills. The lawsuit also mentions Tears of the Kingdom. They mention how the game was leaked over a week and a half before its official release. And for those who don't remember, the Yuzu team explicitly did not get involved. They didn't release any patches or fixes to make Tears of the Kingdom run any better, at least not until after the game was officially released. This lawsuit says that Tears of the Kingdom was downloaded 1 million times on illegal ROM websites. They also claim that many pirate websites claim that you can play this in Yuzu, meaning that Yuzu is somehow complicit in all of this. Yes, you can play Tears of the Kingdom from beginning to end on Yuzu, but that doesn't mean that they're liable or that they're responsible, but they're actively putting the act of piracy on Yuzu. Many people say emulation itself isn't piracy, but if Nintendo gets away with this, then Nintendo can point to this and be like, yeah, emulation is piracy. I don't like that. Anyways, Yuzu isn't the only emulator that has a Patreon. Ryujinx, the other Nintendo Switch emulator, also has a Patreon as well. And even non-Nintendo emulation projects such as RetroArch and even like Vita 3K, they all have Patreon pages, and this helps fund development. They can afford to work on these emulators full time without having to worry about, I don't know, spending 8 hours a day working at a different job that's unrelated to the emulator. If Nintendo can successfully block these developers from being paid by any means necessary, maybe even, I don't know, donations, since Patreons are technically considered donations, then that would essentially mean no emulator can be paid for their work. No one can donate to these emulation developers, meaning that emulation development can become halted, slowed to a crawl. All of your rapid updates and rapid improvements to emulation basically would be gone. Will there be updates? I'm sure there will be updates. There are hobbyists that'll do this for free. But if they work a normal 8 to 5 job, they couldn't devote all of their time to this. They couldn't even devote most of their time to this, to be honest. This has a rippling effect on the entire emulation scene as a whole. Even, you know, non-Nintendo emulators as well. Remember Sony tried to sue emulation first? Now if Nintendo wins, Sony may be emboldened to sue our PCS3 tomorrow. I have a lot of crazier theories as to what could happen when Nintendo win, but I'm not going to discuss those because that would bloat the video up to at least an hour. Plus, they don't sound that realistic. What happens if Nintendo wins? Well, everyone's going to point to Nintendo of America Incorporated versus Tropic Haze LLC. They're going to point to this case and say this is the case that saved emulation or legitimized emulation or whatever. It would continue to maintain the legitimacy of emulators, but I think emulation as a whole would benefit even more from this. How, you might ask? Well, it's simple, really. This could even have crazy implications on the nature of piracy itself. The nature of backing up all of your media. I'm not gonna lie to you, I couldn't begin to fathom the benefits the emulation community could reap from this. I don't know what sort of benefits the piracy community could reap from this as well. But what I do know is that this is a fight worth fighting. Yes, the Yuzu community will stand by the Yuzu developers and presumably support them. But I think the emulation community as a whole will stick by Yuzu as well. Like, I don't know, maybe they'll make a GoFundMe for their legal page. If such a thing does exist, I will donate to that GoFundMe. Game preservation has become more and more of a challenge these days, and emulation helps to preserve some of these games in their original form. Physical media is good and oftentimes better than digital only copies, but you know, physical media is physical. It can break down, it can erode over time. And even the hardware itself isn't immune. As hardware ages, more and more units die, and there'll be less and less units for you to play on. Emulation is one such way to preserve games and to relive games the way they were, and without that, you wouldn't be able to learn from older games. And it's not just users that benefit, major companies benefit from emulation as well. Nintendo themselves benefit from emulation. They've been benefiting since the Wii era. Their entire virtual console catalog is built on emulation. If you like this video, please press the like button and check out our other videos. And if you like those other videos as well, be sure to press the subscribe button and share the good gospel of high-tech lowlife with your friends. Furthermore, we have a community Discord for enlightened individuals such as you. And if you wish to further support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page. Links in the description.